Good evening, and I want to welcome everyone to our very first Conversations with Harriet Tubman. I'm Jamie Stout, Director of Membership for the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Foundation, and tonight I am joined by Kathryn Harris as Harriet Tubman. Kathryn retired from the ALPLM as the Library Services Director in 2015 after starting in 1990. She also worked with the Illinois State Historical Library, SIU Medical School, Illinois State Library, Springfield's Lincoln Public Library, the former Sangamon State University, as well as Florida International University. She's very involved in her community, and she also serves as a board of trustees for the ALPLM. Tonight, Kathryn, aka Harriet, will start us off with her first person monologue about her life as an Underground Railroad conductor and so much more. If you have any questions throughout the night, please type them in the question and answer box below. So we will try to get to as many of them as possible. And please help me welcome Ms. Harriet Tubman.
Good evening. I want to thank y'all for joining me tonight so I can tell you about the work that I've done on the railroad. Now, you may think it odd that I, a woman, worked on the railroad, but I did work on the railroad, the Underground Railroad, that is. Now, before I go any further, and so there won't be no misunderstanding, I'll have to tell you something. And that is the Underground Railroad, why, it wasn't even underground. The Underground Railroad, why, it wasn't even a railroad in the true sense of the word. So if it wasn't underground and it wasn't a railroad, then what, pray tell, was it? Well, I'm gonna tell you that too. You see, what the railroad was, it was a connection. It was a network of people and places. Now, the folks who work on the railroad, they belong to a group called themselves abolitionists. Now, they was white abolitionists and they was colored abolitionists too. But you see, they all work together for the same reason. You see, an abolitionist believe that slavery is wrong. An abolitionist believe that families ought not be separated. And abolitionists believe that mamas ought not have their babies ripped out their arms and sold away, never to be seen again in life. And abolitionists believe that no man should own another. Now, I said the railroad was a connection, a network of people and places. And I've told you a little bit about the people. So now I'll tell you a little bit about the places. Now, the places on this railroad, and we call those places stations. Why, a station might be a cellar. It might be an attic. It might be the back of a wagon. It might be the forest, the swamps, all outside. Because you see, what the railroad really was a way to freedom for the escaping slaves. I also have to tell you this. The railroad was secret and it was also illegal. But I want you to know, it was the way to freedom for the escaping slaves. Oh, I didn't tell you my name, did I? Well, my name is Harriet Tubman. Folks call me Moses. Now, y'all know about Moses, don't you? Y'all know that Moses in the Bible led his folks from slavery to freedom. And since I, Harriet Tubman, have led my folks from slavery to freedom, folks call me Moses too. Now, I was born a slave. I was born in Dorchester County, Maryland. I was born in 1820. Of course, now it could have been 1821, Could have been 1822. It might even been 1823, because you see, don't nobody care about no slave having a birthday. But I was born because I'm right here before you right now. Now, on that plantation where I was born there in Dorchester County, Maryland, was owned by a man whose name was Master Brodus. And on Master Brodus's plantation, I worked out in the timber. I worked out there with my papa, and I got to be as strong as any man. But you see, I had heard about something called freedom, and I decided I wanted to have me some of that. So in 1849, I decided that I was going to be free. And with the help of those kindly abolitionist folks that I told y'all about, I got to my freedom. I want y'all to know that those kindly abolitionist folks told me that when I got, not if I got, but when I got from Dorchester County, Maryland to Philadelphia, that I would be free. And with their help, I got to Philadelphia and I got to my freedom. Now, those folks told me that when I got there to Philadelphia, I should look for a man whose name was Mr. William Still. Now, Mr. William Still was a free colored man. He was not a slave. Mr. William Still was an important colored man as well. You see, Mr. Still was the secretary to the Anti-Slavery Society right there in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. But more important than all of that, Mr. Still was a station master on the Underground Railroad. So like I said, I got there in Philadelphia in 1849, and I stayed there for 2 years. And I met up with Mr. Still. And he and we got to be very fast friends. And while I was there in Philadelphia, I hired myself out as a cook and a washerwoman. And with the money that I earned, I give it back to Mr. Still, because you see, it takes money to operate the Underground Railroad. Well, over time, Mr. Still, we got to be very fast friends, like I said, and he taught me all about the operation of the Underground Railroad. So in 1851, Mr. Still decided that since I, Harriet Tubman, had made my own way escape to freedom with the help of those kindly abolitionist folks that I told you about, Mr. Still decided that I might be the kind of person who could be a conductor on his railroad. So in 1851, I started making my trips as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. And I want y'all to know that one of the very first stops that I made as a conductor on the railroad, I went right back to Dorchester County, Maryland. I went right back to Master Brodus's plantation, and I spirited away to freedom my brothers and their families, took them all the way up into Canada, their way where they could truly be free. Over time, I made about 13 trips on that railroad. I led scores of my people from slavery to freedom. You see, on that railroad, we mostly traveled at night. We hid in the day. At night, we'd follow that North Star. We'd follow that drinking gourd. Sometimes we even follow the moss that grow on the north side of the trees, because you see, all roads that lead north, they lead to freedom. Well, as it turns out, long about 1855, that's when I was doing some of my best work. Those Maryland plantation owners, they had a bounty. They had a reward for my capture. They had them posters, wanted, Harriet Tubman, dead or alive. That bounty money started off at about $12,000. But by the time 18 and 55 come on, that bounty money had grown all the way to $40,000. But you know what? Nobody never did claim it because nobody never could catch me. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because I, Harriet Tubman, I never run my train off the track and I never lost a passenger. All of those who traveled with me, they all got to freedom. But pretty soon we start hearing about the rumbling of a war, and that war come on in 1861. That'd be the Civil War, you know. It run all the way till 1865, but back there in 1863, Father Abraham, that's what we called him, Father Abraham, he give out that Emancipation Proclamation, and then back there in December of 1865, signed that 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And if you mix them two together, you have the end, the abolition of slavery in these United States. So it wasn't no more need for the railroad, so it just closed up. But you know, even at the close of the war, there was still work to do for the cause of freedom. And I, Harriet Tubman, I did that work as well. So you're probably wondering, well, Miss Tubman, what'd you do at the close of the war? Well, you know I'm gonna tell you. At the close of the war, I worked for the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, y'all know what the Freedmen's Bureau is? Some of you do and some of you don't, so I know I have to tell you. The Freedmen's Bureau, funny as it might sound, was set up by the federal government to help them former slaves learn how to be free. You see, what that Freedmen's Bureau done was it taught them former slaves how to present themselves for work. You see, they already knew how to work, having been a slave and all, but how to present themselves for work, get paid for their labors, keep the money for themselves, and be their own masters for a change. But I'm gonna tell you, the best thing that Freedmen's Bureau done was taught them former slaves how to read and write. Because in slavery days, against the law, teach a slave how to read and write. Well, told y'all about my mama and my papa and my brothers that I took all the way up into Canada. Or at the close of the war, I went back up into Canada and I brung them back across the falls. That would be Niagara Falls. And I settled in a place called Auburn, New York. And that's where I live today. I live in Auburn, New York. And it is there that I take care of my aging mama and my aging papa. But I have also opened my home up to other former slaves who's getting old and up in years and don't have no one to care for them. So the folks there in Auburn say that I operate an old folks home. And I reckon I do. I operate an old folks home right there in Auburn, New York. So now I mostly just reflect. I think about the work that I done on the railroad. And I want y'all to know that working on the railroad was hard work, it was risky work, and it was dangerous work. But you know what? I'm mighty glad that I done it. Now, before I go tonight, I'm hoping that some of y'all might have a few questions you might want to ask me. You can ask me anything you want. I'll try my best to answer. Don't be shy. You can ask me anything you want, and I'll do my best to answer. So is there any questions for me?
Well, I'm glad that you asked, Harriet. We have tons of questions already, and we have more coming in. So again, if you have some, just type in the question and answer. we'll try to get to as many as possible tonight. But one of the questions that has come in, and you led to it a little bit, is how many people do you believe that you had helped to freedom, and how many trips did you go back down south?
Well, I can only answer one question at a time, and I believe you tried to ask me two right there, ma'am. So the first question was, how many times did I go?
Yes.
I believe I said I went about 13 trips, and I led scores of my people. Now, do you know how many a score is? That's the first thing.
100?
Do you know what? No, ma'am. A score is but 20, but I led scores of my people from slavery to freedom. Now, Mr. William Steele, who I mentioned earlier, he said that somebody told him, and he had written in his book maybe, that I led about 300 folks from slavery to freedom. But you know what? I wasn't counting. Whoever wanted to go is how many that I took. Sometimes it might just be a couple, like my mama and my papa when I took them, but other times it could be 10 or 5 or 12 or whatever. I wasn't even counting. I led as many that wanted to go to freedom. The only thing I ask is, if you come with me, you have to do as I say. Because if you don't, we all could be at risk. You have to do as I say. That answer your question, ma'am?
That does, and that's a great rule. Another thing that's come in, Sarah Bradford had quoted Harriet, recalling, "When I found I had crossed the line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun come through like gold in the trees and over the fields. I felt like I was in heaven." Here, describing when you arrived in the Northern Free Territory, but did you also have other mixed emotions?
Do you know what? You mentioned Miss Sarah H. Bradford. Here, she spoke about that in this book. Now, I can neither read nor write, but I do know that the name of this book is Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman by Sarah H. Bradford. You know, she's a kindly Quaker woman, lived there in Auburn. And when I got there to Auburn, she said, "Miss Tubman, Harriet, you know, you should write a book about your adventures and all the work that you done on the railroad, because people are interested in that." And I said, "Well, Miss Bradford, I can neither read nor write." So she said, "Well, if you tell me your story, I'll put it in the book." And this here is the book that she put it in, right here. It was wrote in 1869. I can't read a word of it, but I know it's all true because I said it. But yes, when I got there to Philadelphia and got to my freedom, such a glory come over me. It was almost more than I could stand. I looked at my hands. I looked at my feet. They was the same hands, same feet, except they was free. And such a glory come over me. But you know what, ma'am? Being there in freedom, I didn't have no one to share it with, my happiness. So that's why I decided I had to go back south to get my family and my friends so they could enjoy this freedom with me. That answer your question, ma'am?
It does, thank you. Another question that has come in, it says that you were very visible after the Civil War was over. Weren't you afraid of retribution from Southern sympathizers hoping to gain revenge on you even after the war?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I don't know nothing about retribution. That's a mighty big word. I do know about revenge, but I'm going to tell you, as I believed when I was working on the railroad, the good Lord called me to do this work. The good Lord laid his hands on me to do this work. And I want you to know that where the good Lord leads me. He never left me. And he has never left me yet, even in the days past the end of the war. So the good Lord has always been with me. So I didn't have no fear of what you called it, retribution from folks at all. Because the good Lord was with me and kept me. That answer your question well enough?
It does, thank you. Another question that has come in is, people know that you had sleeping spells or headaches throughout your travels. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, how did that happen? Or did it ever get better as you aged?
I'm going to tell you, I have always known about the desire to have freedom be burning in the belly of a slave. I've never known a slave not to have that desire to be free. And even as a child, I might want to let y'all folks know this, that as a child, I was called Minty. My name was Araminta Ross. I was called Minty for short. My mama's name, her name was Harriet Green Ross, and my papa's name was Benjamin Ross. And when I got my freedom, not got my freedom, I took my freedom. Y'all know what take your freedom mean? You put one foot in front of the other and you just walk away. And that's how I got my freedom. I took it. And so when I took my freedom, I changed my name to Harriet to honor my mother, because I was free and I could do what I wanted. But nevertheless, what did you ask me? I forgot.
Well, I think that helps to answer a lot of it. More questions are coming in. Were you ever married, and did you ever have any children?
Why is it folks always want to know about my personal business? Well, in all honesty, I was married. In fact, I'm working on husband number 2 right now. So my first husband, his name was John Tubman. John Tubman, he lived on a neighboring plantation, you see. And John Tubman, he took a liking to me, and he come courting with Master Brodus's permission. So me and John Tubman, we married up. Me and John Tubman, we married up in 1847. We married up in the slave way. Now, do y'all know what that means, get married up in the slave way? Do you know?
No.
Well, I'm gonna tell you. That means me and John Tubman, we jumped the broom. You see, that was one of the things that come with us when they brung us over there from Africa all them years ago. My mama, Harriet, they used to call her Rit. They told me that. And so me and John Tubman, we married up in the slave way in 1847. But in 1849, when I decided that I was going to be free, I said, John Tubman, do you want to be free with me on free soil? You see, John Tubman was already free, but he stayed there on his former master's plantation. I guess he didn't have nowhere else to go, but he had to pay him his room and board because he hired himself out. And with the money that he earned, he had to give some of it back to his master for his keep there. But I said, John Tubman, do you want to be free with me on free soil? John Tubman said he was already free, so he wasn't going nowhere. I said, well, I ain't free, so I left. So there wasn't no more of me and John Tubman. But I told y'all that at the close of the war, I worked in the Freedman's Bureau. And that's where I met husband number 2 that I have right now. Husband number 2, his name is Nelson Davis. Now, y'all probably never heard of Nelson Davis, so I believe I have to tell you about it. You see, Nelson Davis, was born a slave in the Deep South. He was born in Mississippi. That's what we call the Deep South. But Nelson Davis had heard about that proclamation that Father Abraham had given out back in 1863. And in it, Father Abraham said something like this, that if any escaping slave can make his way through Confederate lines and end up in a place in Confederate lines that's being occupied by Union troops, that if he can get himself there and vow his allegiance to the Union Army and vow to fight for the cause of freedom, then he could get his freedom. So that's just what my Nelson done. He made his way all the way from the Deep South of Mississippi, all the way to Beaufort, South Carolina. And in 1864, Beaufort, South Carolina was being occupied by Union troops. And so my Nelson, he joined up with the United States colored troops from South Carolina, and he served in those troops till the close of the war. And I want y'all to know that there was thousands of free coloreds and escaped slaves that served in the Union Army, in the colored troops. I want y'all to know our freedom wasn't just give to us. Them colored soldiers fought, bled, and died right there alongside them white folks, soldiers who was fighting for the cause of freedom. And I, Harriet Tubman, I served as a scout and a spy and a nurse in Mr. Lincoln's army. So I done my bit. I done my work for the cause of freedom in the war as well. Did that answer your question, ma'am?
Did you have any children at any time?
Well, I told y'all what happened to me and John Tubman. You see, he had took up with another woman by the time I come back. And Nelson and me, by the time we got together, I was too old to have any babies. But my sister, she had a baby. And my sister, I don't know what happened to her. She got lost in the cause of the war. And so her daughter, Gertie, I raised her as my own. That answer your question?
Very good, thank you. Another question has come in is, did you ever meet Mr. or Mrs. Lincoln?
Now, I just want you to think about that, what you just asked me. Now, how is it gonna look that me, Harriet Tubman, an escaped slave, with a reward on her head, how's it gonna look me being in the White House with the president? Now, I'm gonna tell you, the president knowed about me, and I knowed about him, and I done what I did to kind of help him along with freeing of the slaves. So I never did meet him face to face, but he knowed about me and I knowed about him. And I'm gonna tell you, when Father Abraham, when that dastardly man, whose name I do not even allow to cross my tongue, shot him right there in that theater, it was a very sad day for the coloreds, because Father Abraham was a martyr for my people. John Brown, the man with the fiery eyes and the flowing white hair, him and Father Abraham, they done more for my people than anyone ever. So.
Very good. Another question, how well did you know Frederick Douglass, or what was your relationship with him?
Well, did I know Frederick? That's what I call him. Now, like I said, I can neither read nor write, But in here, in this book that I showed y'all, there is a letter that Frederick Douglass wrote and put in this book. And he has called me a woman of true character, and that all the things that he had heard about me, he believed them to be true. Now, that raid on that Harper's Ferry that John Brown had, I was there up in Canada with Frederick and me and John Brown when we come to plan that raid, you see. But we had it all worked out and everything, but Frederick, he decided it wasn't too smart of a thing to do, and I had the consumption. So John Brown went on and took care of it, but he didn't come to a very good end. In fact, he come to the end of a rope, if you remember. So, but yes, Frederick and I was very good friends. And Frederick, he lived right there in Rochester, which ain't very far from Auburn. And so we's very good friends. I loved him a lot. I even made a quilt for him.
Very nice. David asks, Frederick Douglass eulogized Mr. Lincoln by saying Lincoln was empathetically the black man's president, the first to show his respect for their rights as men. Do you agree with him, or if not, why not?
Well, like I said, Father Abraham done more than anyone, in my opinion, for people that look like me. So yeah, I do believe that that to be true. I believe there's even a statue to that effect somewhere. I've only heard of it. I've not seen it, but I believe there is one somewhere in Washington City that honors Father Abraham and the freeing of the slaves. I believe it's in some park somewhere. I've never been there, but I've heard of it.
Very good. How were you involved in women's rights and women's suffrage after the Civil War?
Well, I thought it more important at first to get the right to vote. They call it the suffrage and the franchise for the colored man, especially since he had served and gave his life for the Union, that the colored man should have the right to vote. And so once that was taken care of, I did work for the woman's right to vote. But I'm still working on that. But I did have the pleasure to meet Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and I even met Sojourner at one time as well. You know who Sojourner is. Sojourner Truth.
Absolutely. Yes.
She worked very hard for that suffrage for women.
Absolutely. Another question's come in from one of our members, Jennifer. She said, how old were you when you first escaped? And I know that's a little bit challenging, not knowing exactly when your birthday was, but about how old?
Well, I was a teenager, and I guess about 12, 13, and that's about the time that I got hit in the head. That's one of the reasons why I wear this scarf, because I have a scar right here where I got hit in the head with like a 2-pound weight. You see, I was at the general store. Master Brodus had allowed me and another slave boy to go into town to get some provisions, you know, things that we needed. And so I'm just gonna call him Sam. Sam decided that he was gonna try to break and get to freedom. So he tried to run out the back door of the store and run out into the woods and try to get on the road to freedom. Well, the storekeeper, he kind of figured out what Sam was trying to do, and he hurled this weight, knocked me in the head and knocked me plumb out. Give me what my mama called me was the sleeping sickness. And when I got there to Philadelphia, it would cause me to fall asleep at the drop of a hat sometimes. And so when I got there to Philadelphia and I had one of them spells, as I would call it, Mr. Steele, one of his kindly Quaker abolitionist doctors, he put a name on it. He called it narcolepsy or epilepsy or something like that. But I just call it a sleeping fit because that's what my mama called it. And so folks have asked me over the years, well, Miss Tubman or Harriet, did them sleeping sicknesses ever cause you any trouble when you was on the railroad? And so I have to stop and think. And then I decided that I guess it never was no problem to me because like I said, Harriet Tubman, I never run my train off the track and I never lost a passenger. So I guess it never was no bother to me. That answer your question, ma'am?
Sure does, thank you. Larry asks, in 1863, you were in South Carolina along with the 54th Mass Infantry, and you led a raid there that freed 750 slaves. Can you tell us more about that?
That was right there on the Combahee River. I was right there in South Carolina with General Saxon and General Montgomery, and I'm gonna let you know, we had a raid on that plantation. We burned the indigo, we burned the rice, but you know what we did? We led nigh on to 700 plus slaves to freedom on that day. And it is, to my knowledge, the only time a woman has led a raid successfully in military history, and Harriet Tubman, I done that.
That's awesome. Can you tell us more about your military experience and your service in the war? What all things you did, and tell us more.
Well, sometimes because I was a scout and I was a spy, I would go behind the enemy lines because who would expect me, a little short colored lady, to be passing notes and getting information and, you know, just kind of infiltrating behind the enemy lines and getting information that I would carry back to the Union generals. You know, who would expect me, a little short colored lady, supposed to be silly and stupid and don't know nothing? Little did they know that this little short colored lady was Harriet Tubman getting information for the good of the Union Army and the Union generals. I've done that several times, even rode on a train one time behind enemy lines to get information for the Union troops.
You're amazing. Some questions are coming in about who were your friends along the way, or did people help you while you were on the Underground Railroad, and how many stops along the way, and were there friends or people that helped you?
You know, you used the word friends. And of course, I had lots of friends, and that's what we call the Quakers, because the Quakers was very helpful to me on the Underground Railroad, and we called them friends. And I had a friend whose name was Thomas Garrett. He was a Quaker, and he was truly my friend. So I called him Friend Garrett. Thomas Garrett lived in Wilmington, Delaware. And Thomas Garrett was truly a friend to the escaping slaves. You see, through his house, right there in Wilmington, Delaware, he gave safe harbor to more than 2,500 of my people over time. You see, Thomas Garrett was a staunch abolitionist, and he put his money where his mouth was. Because you see, if you was an abolitionist like Thomas Garrett was, or if you was an abolitionist, period, and you got found out, you could have your property confiscated, you could be thrown in jail, and you could be fined. Thomas Garrett, he was a staunch abolitionist, and he believed in the abolition of slavery, and he was indeed thrown into jail, fined, and his property confiscated. He was a cobbler. He made shoes. He made shoes for me and my passengers sometimes. But nevertheless, Thomas Garrett said he didn't care. He was going to keep on doing what he was doing to fight for the cause and the abolition of slavery. And like I said, he gave safe harbor to now on to 2,500 of my folks right there in Wilmington, Delaware. Yes, sir, he did.
That's a great.
And he was a Quaker.
That's great. Another question's coming from Lila. She asked, how long did it take for someone to get from the South to the North? For your journey, for example, how long did it take you?
Well, you see, that is a mighty good question, and folks have asked me this. Now, let me ask you this. I just want you to think about it. I'm going to tell you, my trip that I took for my own escape from slavery, from Philadelphia up into Canada, where I took my mama and my papa. Well, from Philadelphia, that trip took me, nigh on to 3 months, you see, because it was mostly by foot. Mostly by foot.
Absolutely. Did you have any weapons that helped you along the way, or anything like that?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I did carry in my bag. I did have my friendly persuader, as I like to call it. You see, sometimes my passengers, they might get scared, they might get tired, they might get cold, they might get hungry, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, Harriet, Miss Tubman, I'm cold, I'm tired, I'm scared, I want to go back to master. Now, what you think gonna happen to a slave been with me on the run to freedom, go back to master? Well, I'm gonna tell you, he gonna get beat, he gonna get whooped, and while he's getting whooped, master or the overseer gonna be saying, where's Harriet? Where's she going? How many weather? Where's she been? All of that. And tongue get to wagging, and pretty soon, Underground Railroad won't be no secret. They might go find me. So when folks like that come up to me talking all stupid, I have to reach in my bag, pull out my friendly persuader, and I say, live free or die. All of a sudden, they don't be tired, they don't be cold, they don't be hungry. They just want to keep on walking for the cause of freedom. But I want you to know, ma'am, I never did have to shoot none of my passengers, but I did a whole lot of intimidating, I guess. That answer your question?
It sure does. Thank you. Dick Marin, one of our board members, has asked, did you ever go through Gettysburg, Pennsylvania with the railroad?
Did I ever go through Gettysburg with the railroad? You know, I went so many places, I can't necessarily remember if I passed through that place called Gettysburg or not. That'd be there in Pennsylvania too, but I probably did, but I don't never have no specific recollection of it. I understand that was where they had a really bloody battle there. And I understand that's where the president made those really moving remarks too. I wasn't in the crowd when he made those remarks.
Absolutely. There's several questions coming in tonight, Harriet, about how can people learn more about Underground Railroad stops or maybe in their hometown. Specifically, we've been asked about Chicagoland or Putnam County here, but how would you recommend they go about learning about more of Underground Railroad stops, maybe in areas they're interested in?
Well, I never been to any of those places. My work was on the eastern shore of Maryland and point south and all the way up into Canada. But I'm gonna tell you, that Underground Railroad, like I said, it run all the way as far south as Florida and even into a place called the Caribbean, where I never been there either. All the way as far west as a place called Texas, and all the way up into Canada. So I do believe that if somebody want to know about that, they can probably. I can't read, so I never been to no library. I understand that's where they have books and stuff, but I bet you, and I believe that they could probably go there to a library and read in newspapers and things like that and learn about the railroad, because it run a whole lot of places. Did you know that the railroad was started by a man whose name is Levi Coffin? He lived there in Ohio. We call him the president of the Underground Railroad. Mm-hmm.
Very good. So when we open back up, they can always come over to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and learn about some more Underground Railroad stops that they might be interested in. A question coming from Brian tonight. Were there other train conductors like you, and were they successful?
Well, there were lots of folks who worked on the railroad. But like I said, the railroad was secret and it was illegal. So there wasn't no big sign saying, Underground Railroad stop here, or I'm a conductor. Even if there was, it wouldn't do no good for the slaves because they couldn't read no how. But if you was an abolitionist and you believe in the Underground Railroad and what we was doing, you probably know somebody else who was a conductor or who was abolitionist, and they knew somebody else and they knew somebody else, because you wouldn't really, what would be the word, let it be known that you was a conductor, because it was an illegal activity. That fugitive slave law that come out in 1850, wow, that really made it hard for us who was on the railroad, because it said that even if an escaping slave was caught on free territory, he could be sold back into slavery. So that really made it hard. That really made it hard. That was the terriblest thing, that 1850 fugitive slave law.
Yes. John's asking a question tonight, Harriet. Did the newspapers in New York write about you when you were working the underground, or was it later once the war had ended?
Like I said, I couldn't read, so I wouldn't know the answer to that. But if they did write about me, I would imagine it might have been afterwards, because like I said, it was illegal. But I know that there was ads sometimes in newspapers that would say, come join on the Freedom Line or the Liberty Line, which was what would you call it? A password, maybe? A secret word, a code for working on the Underground Railroad or getting on the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
Like I said, I couldn't read, so I wouldn't really know.
Very good. Everyone's asking, and I'm sure you've seen the movie these days, but everybody wants.
I've seen what?
A movie called Harriet. So
what is a movie? What is a movie?
It's a very recent movie, so I'm sure you've seen that, but everybody's wanting to know if that was a really accurate portrayal of your life.
Well, since I don't know nothing about what no movie is, I really can't answer that question, ma'am.
Very good, very good.
Do you have another question?
I do have lots of questions, actually.
But you know what? Is it getting time for us to be finishing this conversation? Because I have a few things that I'd like to share.
Help yourself. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank everybody for coming tonight, and that y'all asked very good questions. And as I take off my gloves, because I have on fingernail polish, and I take off my scarf, I am now Kathryn Harris. And I'm going to address the question that you just asked, Miss Jamie. And I'm going to put on my glasses so I can really see, because I can't see nothing with these stage glasses on. But in reference to the movie, oh, that's so much better. I did indeed go see the movie Harriet. And from what I have learned about Harriet Tubman over the years that I have read and studied about her, it was a very good depiction of her life. What would you call it? The person who did the historical research for the movie, her name was Kate Larson, and she was the historian, and she has a book about Harriet Tubman that was very well received and very well reviewed. I have, and Miss Jamie, I will send you a list of books that I have used over the years for study about Harriet Tubman that perhaps you might put out there magically, that folks can learn more about Harriet Tubman.
That's Francie's actually asked that question. What books do you recommend? So yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Email the crowd your list of recommendations. That would be fantastic.
Right. I will get those to you tomorrow. It's really very, I have this one little story. I showed you the book that was written in 1869 about Harriet Tubman. The next book that was and then that book was updated, so to speak. A new version, revision of it was done in 1898, I think it was. But there was not a biography of Harriet Tubman done until 1943. And it was done by a man whose name is Earl Conrad. And he was a white reporter for a New York paper. And he had hell of a time trying to get his book published, because nobody wanted to publish a book about Harriet Tubman. But it wasn't until like 2003 and 2004, there were 3 books published all in a row about Harriet Tubman. The one that I mentioned by Kathryn Larson, Kate Larson, and Catherine Clinton, and a lady whose name is Humez. And those are on my list. Those are modern. But what is really interesting is that there are more children's books about Harriet Tubman than probably any other figure in in children's literature, because children are really taken by Harriet's story, because she was a woman and she was brave and she risked her life, and she is a role model to girls and boys. And during, particularly during African American History Month, the boys and the girls dress up as Harriet Tubman, because she is such an admired figure from American history.
That's awesome. I know we have some kids in the audience tonight, so thanks for sharing that. That's fun. One question that came in early on, and it's a great time now, they wanted to know how long you have been portraying Harriet Tubman, and how did you go about getting started doing it?
Probably about toward 1998 or 1997, somewhere along in that. I made a woman come alive for our local cemetery walk for the Sangamon County Historical Society. Her name's Phoebe Florville. She was the wife of Mr. Lincoln's barber. That was Billy the barber, William Florville. And so I made her come alive. And so my friend and colleague, who was in charge of the old state capitol, she had an outreach group with the children at Isles School. And they studied the Civil War, and she had reenactors and all come, and the children wanted to know about Harriet Tubman. So she had seen me make Phoebe Florville come alive, and she said, "Kathryn, would you make Harriet come alive for the children?" That was in October. And so in March, when her program started, And working in the library as I did, I read every book that was in the library collection about Harriet Tubman, every encyclopedia reference I could find. And this was in the very early days of the internet even. But that's how I put together the information that I now share about Harriet Tubman. And I continue to try to learn about her.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Can you just tell us, like, towards the end of Harriet's life, how long, you know, what was her age when she passed away, or what was the very end of her life like?
Harriet, I told you that she had the old age home in Auburn, New York. Well, Harriet became her own best roomer or boarder because she died penniless right there in her own old age home on March 10th, 1913. She was easily 90 years old. Nobody knows because nobody knows when Harriet Tubman was born. But she died March 10th, 1913. And in Auburn, New York, it is not a holiday, but they always have special programs to honor Harriet Tubman in Auburn on March 10th, 1913. It's on her death date that they do that. And the people in Auburn were so taken by Harriet Tubman and her story and her contribution to American history that when she died penniless, there was no money to erect a tombstone. So the people in Auburn collected funds, and they erected a tombstone for her in the graveyard. And on it, it says something like, "Here lies Harriet Tubman. She led 300 slaves from slavery to freedom." But it says something that Harriet said herself: "I never run my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." And that's engraved on her tombstone at the cemetery right there in Auburn, New York.
That is so fantastic. Well, Kathryn, Harriet, we can't thank you enough. Your research is very thorough. You have certainly entertained us tonight. I know I've seen you portray Harriet many times before. I learned something new every single time. So again, we thank you so much for taking the time tonight to help us learn a little bit more about America's history and Harriet. So, and again, want to thank every one of you for logging on tonight. We hope you are enjoying this type of programming that we're able to provide you via Zoom while we're closed during COVID. We want to continue to offer this type of program even when we do open. Tonight, as you're closing your webinar, a survey will pop up. We do ask that you take just a minute or two to answer those few questions. It helps us to improve these opportunities for you, as well as please consider making a donation to the ALPLF. To help us to be able to continue to do our great work. You can go to our website, www.alplm.org, and make any amount of donation that you feel free to do so. Again, we thank you, Kathryn, and we
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.